The story of Gehazi is one of the most impactful and enigmatic accounts in the Old Testament, described in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 5. Gehazi, the servant of the prophet Elisha, is a character who lives in the shadow of his master's great deeds, but whose name became infamous due to an episode of greed and disobedience. His story carries deep lessons about the consequences of the choices we make and how the desire for more can lead even the closest to God's path astray. Gehazi was a dedicated servant, accompanying Elisha on his journeys and sharing in the mysteries and miracles performed by the prophet. He came from humble beginnings, and his position alongside Elisha gave him access to unique experiences, witnessing God's actions on behalf of the people of Israel. However, despite his closeness to the man of God, Gehazi was still human, and with that came feelings and desires that he kept hidden, feelings that gradually grew in his heart. The modest life he led alongside Elisha began to weigh on him, especially when he saw his master turn down great material rewards for the sake of his faith. Gehazi could not understand why someone with power and influence would choose to live so simply. Deep down, he believed that proximity to divine power should bring some material benefit. This seemingly harmless thought would become the starting point for a series of choices that would change his life forever. When the powerful general Naaman from the Syrian army sought Elisha for healing from his leprosy, Gehazi was present and witnessed an impressive miracle. After being instructed to bathe 7 times in the Jordan River, Naaman was cleansed of his disease, and in gratitude, he offered the prophet a generous reward. But to Gehazi's surprise, Elisha rejected any payment, stating that the work of God could not be bought with silver or gold. It was at this moment that something began to transform within Gehazi. The sight of the rejected treasures sparked a flame of greed in his heart, and he began to question his master's choices, feeding the idea that he deserved more. Little did he know, this hidden desire would lead him down a path of ruin. So, if you enjoy Bible stories, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapters of this story full of twists and deep spiritual lessons. Let's dive together into the mysteries and consequences of Gehazi's choices. After Naaman's departure, Gehazi couldn't shake the image of the reward that Elisha had rejected. The treasures that Naaman had offered shimmered in his imagination, promising a different life, far from the limitations of the modest life he led alongside the prophet. He tried to ignore this unease, but it was like a seed of greed that, once planted, grew and consumed his thoughts. In his mind, Gehazi wondered, why would God allow such a valuable opportunity to slip away? Even though he had been by Elisha's side for many years, the weight of his ambition overshadowed the voice of reason. He knew that the prophet did not approve of wealth or material comfort, believing that the true purpose was to serve God with humility. But Gehazi felt weary of this simplicity and began to justify to himself that he deserved that wealth. After all, he too worked hard, accompanying Elisha on all his missions and sharing in the challenges. With this justification, Gehazi made an impulsive decision that would change the course of his life forever. Seizing the opportunity while Elisha was busy, he set off toward the path that Naaman had taken. He ran, determined to reach him before it was too late. His labored breathing and racing heart revealed not only his physical effort, but also the inner conflict. Part of him knew that this decision was wrong, but another part justified his choice with the promise of a more prosperous future. When he finally caught up with the Syrian general, Gehazi tried to maintain a calm demeanor, although the tension was evident in his eyes. As he approached, he lied, claiming that Elisha had changed his mind and now accepted a gift for 2 young prophets in need. Naaman, relieved to be able to show his gratitude, quickly handed Gehazi to fine garments and a significant amount of silver. To Naaman, it was just a gesture, but to Gehazi, it represented the chance to satisfy his desire for a life of greater comfort. With his heart racing, Gehazi took the gifts and hid them carefully, away from Elisha'S eyes and any other witnesses. He took a deep breath, relieved, thinking he had completed his mission without leaving a trace. But what Gehazi didn't know was that his actions had not escaped the watchful and spiritual gaze of his master. He returned to Elisha'S side, trying to act normal, as if nothing had happened, unaware that he was about to be confronted in a way he would never forget. When Gehazi returned to Elisha'S presence, he believed everything was under control. He had carefully hidden Naaman's gifts and was confident that the prophet would never find out. However, as he approached, Gehazi noticed a different look in Elisha'S eyes, a gaze that seemed to pierce his soul, seeing through any attempt at disguise. The silence in the room was heavy, and Gehazi's heart began to race. He tried to act naturally, but soon realized something was wrong. Elisha watched him for a moment before calmly and directly asking, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" Gehazi tried to hide his nervousness and replied that he had not gone anywhere. But Elisha continued to look at him, his face showing a mixture of sadness and disappointment. With a serenity that only intensified the weight of the situation, the prophet revealed the truth. "Was not my spirit with you when you ran after Naaman?" These words were a shock to Gehazi. Elisha knew everything. Every step he had taken, every word spoken to Naaman, all was before the prophet, as if he himself had witnessed the scene. Gehazi felt naked, exposed, with nowhere to hide. It was as if God himself was revealing his mistake, leaving him no escape. In a last-ditch effort, Gehazi tried to justify his actions, saying that he only wanted to help, that the gifts could be useful. But Elisha interrupted him with a voice full of authority and sadness. Was this the time to accept silver, clothes, olive groves, vineyards, sheep, oxen, servants, and maidservants? Elisha showed him that his greed affected not only himself, but dishonored the divine mission they shared. Gehazi began to realize the depth of his mistake. By giving in to temptation, he had not only betrayed Elisha'S trust, but also distorted God's message to Naaman. The weight of guilt fell upon him, and Gehazi finally understood that his choices had consequences. Elisha then pronounced a sentence that would echo like a curse. "The leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and your descendants forever." In that instant, Gehazi's skin began to change, becoming as white as snow, marked by the disease that had once been removed from Naaman. He left Elisha'S presence with a broken heart, carrying the mark of his disobedience forever. From that moment on, Gehazi's life would never be the same. Carrying leprosy, he was cast out, as the disease made him unclean in the eyes of the community. Gehazi, who had once accompanied Elisha on his missions and witnessed the miracles of God up close, now found himself alone and rejected, condemned to live on the margins of society. The leprosy, besides transforming his body, brought profound isolation. He could no longer share in any fellowship, nor receive comfort from friends or family. As he wandered in exile, Gehazi had plenty of time to reflect on his mistakes. The image of Elisha'S disappointed gaze constantly haunted him, like a ghost, reminding him of everything he had lost. He mentally replayed the moment when he had lied to the prophet, the excuses he had made to himself, and the greed that had gradually blinded his spiritual vision. He realized how foolish he had been to place his desire for wealth above the honor of serving God. In the silence of his solitude, Gehazi began to understand the consequences of greed and a lack of integrity. The desire for material goods had become his ruin, driving him away from God and the purpose that had once illuminated his path. Each day felt like a punishment, a constant reminder that he had lost God's grace, trading the well-being of his soul for treasures he would never use. With no one to turn to, Gehazi sank into sadness, and regret became his only companion. No matter how hard he tried to reconcile with his past, the scars of his disobedience were etched both on his skin and in his heart. He carried the mark of his failure as a constant reminder of how bitter the path of greed had been. Gehazi began to understand the value of what he had abandoned and felt an insurmountable emptiness, a longing for the words of his master and the peace that had once filled his soul. His story, now filled with pain and regret, would serve as an eternal lesson for those who encountered him. Gehazi finally understood that his greatest loss was not in the riches he would never enjoy, but in the connection he had broken with the sacred something far more precious than gold or silver. Time passed, and Gehazi's story spread as a warning to all who heard about the servant who lost everything by yielding to greed. His life, once surrounded by the privilege of being alongside God's prophet, became an example of how unchecked ambition can lead to tragic consequences. Even in his isolation, Gehazi continued to be observed from a distance, and the marks on his skin told a story that his mouth might never need to repeat again. The people who saw him, especially those who had previously been touched by Elisha'S teachings, began to reflect on the dangers of the desire for wealth. The leprosy that marked him was a visible sign of the severity of his choice, a grim reminder that greed can distance a person from God's divine purpose. Seeing Gehazi in his condition, many came to understand the importance of living humbly, putting service to God above personal ambitions. However, for Gehazi, this lesson was not just a message for others. It was a deep and painful truth with which he lived every day. He knew that his physical condition was only part of the price he was paying. The real punishment lay in the constant remembrance of Elisha'S gaze, in the awareness that he had betrayed his master's trust and the principles he himself should have protected. Gehazi had finally accepted that his suffering was the result of his own choices, and that his redemption would not come from immediate forgiveness, but from the long journey of repentance and humility that now lay before him. Thus, isolated and in deep reflection, Gehazi understood that his mistake would be remembered as a cautionary tale for all who sought God's blessings with an impure heart. He came to desire, more than anything else, for his story to help others avoid the same mistake, teaching them the value of integrity and trust in God's providence. Gehazi now lived his final days in solitude, bearing the weight of his choices marked in both his flesh and his soul. The leprosy that had made him an isolated and despised figure seemed to reflect the inner state of the man he had become. Though he had lost everything, the respect of his peers, the friendship of Elisha, and above all, his peace of mind, there was still a part of him that longed for redemption. Yet, unlike what many might expect, it was not an easy or quick redemption. Time did not erase the marks of betrayal, nor lessen the regret that consumed his heart. Gehazi knew he could never turn back, that he could never again serve God fully. His sin was too grave to be forgotten, and as much as his soul cried out for forgiveness, he knew the consequences of his actions were irrevocable. However, Gehazi's final lesson was not only in the pain of his fall, but in accepting the truth about his humanity. He became a figure who, when seen, reminded everyone of the importance of humility, obedience, and purity of heart. No longer blinded by ambition, Gehazi reflected on true wealth, which is not found in material possessions, but in peace with God and integrity before oneself and others. And so, at the end of his life, Gehazi no longer sought riches or revenge, but hoped that his story would serve as a warning for those who came after him. Those who remembered him saw in him a caution against the dangers of unchecked desire and the importance of keeping a pure heart. For, as Gehazi had learned the hard way, God's rewards cannot be bought with silver or clothes, but only through faithfulness and service. In his final reflections, Gehazi understood that his journey of repentance, though bitter, was the only way to restore his soul. And though it was too late to change the course of his life, he trusted that his story would continue to teach, from generation to generation, the true lesson about the consequences of sin and the power of redemption through humility. Did you enjoy this emotional story full of lessons? Then don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more videos like this. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on Gehazi's story, and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear. Thank you so much for your time and support. May Gehazi's lesson inspire us all to seek integrity and true purpose in our lives. See you in the next video, and may God bless everyone.